Soldier Mage King, Chapter 6. The Fires of Idirsholas. Merlin. Merlin had thought it was Morgana's magic keeping her safe from whatever this was. She was still going back and forth on if it was a plague or a spell. Gaius's research, that he'd fallen asleep on, seemed somewhere between the conclusion of one or the other. With him asleep, it would be impossible to tell for certain. Unless... She didn't want to visit the dragon. She had seen the havoc he would wreak on Camelot if he was freed. But then she started to feel ill, tired, bordering on exhaustion. It wasn't the magic keeping Morgana safe, or she wouldn't have been affected either. She had no choice. He forced her to swear on her mother's life that she would free him. They both knew she valued her mother over everything else. Once this was all over, she would free him and damn the consequences. She could not let Arthur die. The truth, though, hurt. It hurt because it was a betrayal and would lead to another. Morgana was the source of the spell, the living vessel. While she lived, the spell remained. Morgana had to die. It wasn't hard, not physically, to slip hemlock into the water skin while Morgana wasn't looking. Her hands were shaking, but she was tired. It wasn't unusual. That and Arthur had just kissed her with the ferocity that told her he wasn't coming back until the knights were dead. Even remembering it made tears rise in her throat as she pretended to drink from the skin. Watching Morgana choke, unable to scream, made Merlin sob. "I'm sorry, Morgana. I had no choice," Merlin managed as she held her dying friend, even as Morgana's eyes stared at her accusingly. The door to the throne room crashed to the floor and Merlin winced, but the sound of clashing steel made her hope that Arthur was still alive. Morgause pushed Merlin away from Morgana as clarity replaced the exhaustion that had been threatening to overwhelm her. The blonde stared down at Morgana, then up at Merlin, fire blazing in her eyes. "You poisoned her!" she accused. "You enchanted her!" Merlin accused right back. The slightest amount of guilt chased anger in Morgause's expression. "What did you use? I can still save her." "End your enchantment on the Knights of Medir," Merlin demanded. For once, she held the only card that mattered. "If you do not tell me what you did, I will kill you where you stand," Morgause snarled. "Then she dies with me," Merlin stated simply, though it sent a wave of pain through her heart. Morgause froze for a moment, seeming to consider her options. Any way she chose, she lost. Then Morgana's breathing slowed drastically. Hemlock didn't take long to kill. It was for that reason Merlin had chosen it, not wanting to prolong her friend's suffering. Morgause's eyes lit up gold as she chanted, armor clattered, and the sounds of battle from the hall fell silent. The knight who had followed her in fell to ash and dust, and Merlin pulled the small bottle of hemlock out of her pocket and handed it to Morgause. The blonde threw her hand up and sent Merlin flying across the room. She thought she heard Arthur cry out her name as she slammed into stone and everything went black. When she woke, the world was dark, but not quiet. "Young warlock!" The call echoed in her aching head, angry and loud. She groaned in pain and the volume dimmed. "You made a vow, young warlock. It is time for you to make good on your end of the bargain." The dragon's voice was impatient, but quieter, as if he could sense her pain. "Take a sword from one of the Knights of Medir. It is an enchanted blade and will sever the chain that binds me." Creeping through the castle in the dead of night had grown easier over the last 2 years as she learned where and when the guards patrolled. It was made difficult this time around by a few factors. First off, none of the usually sleepy guards were tired tonight, which made sense given the circumstances. Morgana was gone, likely dead or missing. Merlin didn't know. She couldn't be alive and well in Camelot, or Merlin would have woken in a cell, not her room. Of that she was certain. There had been no forgiveness in Morgana's eyes. Not that Merlin was really expecting it. Not after what she had done, what she was about to do. The second factor making tonight a bit more difficult was her lack of footwear. She'd tried pulling on her boots, but they wouldn't fit over the splint on her ankle, so she was going barefoot, which admittedly made her steps quieter. The armory was deserted. 7 black swords laid out on the table in a neat row. Merlin didn't know what was to be done with them. Slipping a cloth from the alcove where Gregory stored his polishing supplies, Merlin wrapped one of the swords in it. If she was stopped, she could say Arthur asked for a blade to take out some frustration on a practice dummy. It wouldn't be the first time. She made it down to the dungeons and into the cavern below without issue. The dragon sighed as he saw her. She had the sword under one arm, and this time she stepped further out onto the outcropping of the rock. There had to be a way to access his chains. She spotted it, a set of rough-carved stairs. She descended them in silence. She already knew what this would bring. Fire and death, and every single soul that was lost would be on her. The dragon watched her go. When she reached the chain itself, she was impressed. A single link was taller than her by a good foot, the cold iron wider than her torso. She set down her torch and unwrapped the blade, dropping the cloth. She looked up at the dragon. "Is it all worth it, in the end?" she asked, her voice small. She felt like a child seeking reassurance, but she had just poisoned one of her closest friends, and she was about to be the cause of so much more pain and suffering. When the dragon smiled, it was sad. "In the end, Merlin, that will be for you to decide," he said, as cryptic as ever. Merlin gripped the hilt of the sword in both hands. While she'd been creeping, the dragon had whispered the spell she should speak, and she did, feeling familiar power course through her veins. But even that could not comfort her now. She swung the blade, and it slipped through the iron as if it were mist. The chain shattered, every link breaking one after the other in a shower of sparks. The cuff around the dragon's back foreleg went last, and he seemed to glow from within with a power Merlin had not yet seen. She could feel it, as though it sang to her as well. He took off, wings beating with fury towards the dim light that promised an exit. Merlin crept back through the castle, replacing the blade and making her silent way back to her room. She pulled down the small catch that served as a lock for her room and sat on the bed. She felt empty as she flopped back and curled up around her threadbare pillow. She hugged it to her chest and let the tears fall silently. She had no idea when she fell asleep, only that it was blessedly free of dreams.